Hi, this is Jen Court. I'm really excited to be part of this amazing event with the Making a Difference Professional Development Educators. It's a phenomenal resource, and I hope that you will take advantage of many of the sessions. Today, we're going to talk about how to have a meaningful conversation with kids, even when the topic is challenging for the adults. And this is increasingly common. There are four main constructs that we are educating and raising children in that we didn't have to navigate, or most of us didn't have to navigate when we were younger. And they include everything from sports as an entity around which family life and identity is formed, so that now we've got kids majoring in sports at a really young age. And I always wonder what happens to their identity when they're wrapped up in themselves as an athlete and then their bodies don't do what it needed to do or used to do. And they go from being, I'm Jen, I'm a swimmer, to I'm Jen, and I'm not sure what. So I really worry about that. And we're also seeing an increase in sports related surgeries from a younger age for kids. And this is something that's just caused by frequent overuse of certain parts of the body when they're not ready to be doing all that. Another construct that's really different is engagement in digital life. The iPhone's only 11 years old. So that means the current senior class has no memory of before an iPhone, and no memory of before a cell phone at all. So if we think about that, if we think about the other pieces that kids today are facing, looking at the senior class, for example, and going backward, we've got the senior class as a first grade to be born in soon after 9/11, or soon before 9/11, sorry, but they have no conscious memory of it. So they've grown up with Islamophobia as part of their everyday conversation, and with terrorism having occurred on our country. The current seventh grade, they do not remember a time. This is all assuming memory is fixed around age 4 or 5. They do not remember a time before they had a Black president. So the current president, Donald Trump, is the first white president in their memory, which means that that is unusual for them. The current fourth grade will not remember a time before it was legal to be gay or married, gay and lesbian and married in the United States. Current fourth grade will not remember a time before it was part of talking about being transgender was part of our everyday vernacular. The current kindergartners will not remember a time before kids could start an international movement with a single hashtag, March for Our Lives. Moving back up in the grades, fifth grade will not remember a time before Black Lives Matter was a hashtag. First grade will not remember before the resurgence of the women's movement. And it just goes on and on. And so now, if you look at the media influence of that, around 4 years ago, Cheerios made a radical commercial. They showed interracial families eating Cheerios. And the conversation around that was electrifying. And Cheerios doubled down and bought a commercial during the Super Bowl. Soon after, this was followed by Honey Made graham crackers, showing families doing the radical thing of eating graham crackers. And the difference was that these were gay and lesbian families. And the conversation around these two commercials was so widespread that it had an economic impact, such that now it's nearly impossible to watch TV, watch a movie, see advertising, and not see all kinds of families and faiths and relationships represented. And we're still wildly underrepresented, but it's increasing. So when you put all that together, that means that we are having conversations as adults with kids where we had no understanding of, and no training in, and very little experience of. Today, for example, I'm a diversity educator. Kids tell me all the time, when I tell them that when I was growing up, if you were white, as I am, and you talked about race, you were considered to be racist. And now, if you don't talk about race, you're considered to be careless, thoughtless, and even racist. And we didn't have a connective point in between those two. So it falls to us as educators to be having a lot of conversations with kids around topics that we have no experience of. And so how do we do that? We do that by starting with saying to them, I have no idea what it's like to be a kid your age today. I wasn't trained to talk about these things. We didn't talk about these things when I was your age. Just inviting them to tell you what's going on with them. And listen, 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 listen. We have two ears and one mouth for a reason. We're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk. We should, move away from, we've thought for a long time as educators that we were supposed to be the sage on the stage, and now we know that we're supposed to be the guide on the side. And this practice translates to how we talk to and listen to students about really complicated topics. This is a time for us to become far more comfortable asking the questions and sitting next to the questions than feeling we need to have the answers. So that's the first one. It's just acknowledge that you don't know. Secondly, follow the oxygen mask rule. If you've ever flown on an airplane with young children, you will have a flight attendant come over to you or say publicly, if, in case of emergency, please take care of yourself before your child. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but first time I flew with one of my kiddos, the flight attendant told me that, and I looked at my sweet baby and I thought to myself, don't worry, I'll take care of you first. And I didn't say any words, but the flight attendant came over to me, probably having sensed this or having heard this same comment many times, and looked at me very politely and said, you can't take care of your child if you're not taking care of yourself first. So this is a time for really inviting taking care of yourself, which means that we need to do the radical thing that Cheerios and Honey Maid and other companies have done. We need to think a little differently, including giving ourselves time. There's nothing wrong with, in fact, it's so impactful to say to a child, what you're talking about is so important. It's so important. I really want to give it the time and reflection that it needs. And I don't have the time in my schedule to do that right now. So I'm going to think about that and I'll come back to you. Then set a time for when you come back to them. The trick is to make sure you set and keep the time. That's really important. But that models for kids something that they're not getting very often in our view of the world right now. They're not having people model the importance of stopping and thinking, or to really validate what somebody says. They're so accustomed to a text comes in and they must respond, often without even thinking. So you're providing both, giving yourself time and you're giving them a reflection point, which can be so helpful. Another strategy that I love is to use one sentence. And if you follow me on anything, you've heard me say this repeatedly. It's one of my favorite strategies. If a student brings up a topic, or you know that you have to discuss a topic that's really challenging for you, answer in one sentence. So often we fill space with words, and we do so even more when we're anxious. We fill anxiety with words and we just dump them out there. And most kids will pick every other word or a few words and make up a new sentence for themselves. So answering in one sentence forces us to stop and listen. And I don't mean a run-on sentence or a sentence with lots of colons and commas and it just goes on and on forever. I mean a real sentence, stopping and saying, do you have more questions? And then when they do, they answer that in one sentence. Or do you have more thoughts? What are you thinking right now? How does this sit with you? Something like that to elicit a response from them. And then stop and answer that in one sentence and keep going till there's no more sentences or questions coming forward. And then I suggest ending with, if you have something else, please come back to me. So now you can give yourself time. You can acknowledge that you don't know. You take care of yourself first. You answer in one sentence. And these are all really great skills for kids to learn anyway about a whole variety of topics. These are life skills for them. And we'll build further and think about the value of making a mistake. If you feel that you've handled a conversation with kids in, quote, the wrong way, or you have that feeling, oh, I wish I had done it differently, don't stop with that. Go back to them and say, I wish I'd handled that differently, or I've thought about it, or I read about it and I learned something new. And there's no time limit on this. You can go back to your students months later and say, I've really been thinking about that conversation and I've reflected on it and I have some new thoughts. Do you mind if I share them with you? What does that model? It models that adults can learn and grow from their experiences, that we don't have to feel like we have all the answer, that you've been thinking about that student and that you've been wanting to learn about it. Because if it's challenging to you, it's something you should learn about, and that you care. These are all, again, really validating, important skills for them to have in their lives, and to have their trusted adults be the people to present that to them is supremely helpful. I had a student who, I publicly announced that I had made a mistake. I didn't say his name or anything, but I had an experience when I was a principal. I used to love carpool. I don't know, my students always loved me opening the door in the morning, and I was all excited. Good morning, and so cheerful. And we were on a huge campus, and it gets cold here. And I had a student get out of the car. I was always talking about dressing properly for the weather, and I had a student get out of the car wearing shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of the winter. And I opened the door, and I immediately began fussing at him about how cold it was and how I wished he had dressed warmer. And um, he went about his day. And I kept thinking about that moment and thinking, it's his first welcome to school. I don't know what his morning was like before he got here. It could have been stressful. It could have been great. Who knows? But the potential for it not being a great morning and me being cause of it was really something that I didn't want to be part of. So later on in an assembly, we had a community chance of conversation where we just kind of talked about announcements or things like that. And I announced that I had had this experience with a student, didn't say who it was, and it had been a few days by then, so it could have been any number of them. And I apologized and said that I don't want their school experiences to be layered with just saying what they thought adults wanted them to hear. And I didn't want to be somebody who made them feel like they had to watch how they talked in a negative way around me. And so that was a few years ago. And then my last year being a principal, when I left, that student stood up and said that it was one of the first times he had had an adult apologize to him ever, and certainly to not do it publicly, and how much that meant to him, and how it really made him feel like he could work in partnership with us. It was just a simple thing, but it had a huge impact. And I wondered often, or I've often wondered, what would it have been if it were the opposite? If I hadn't apologized, then what would the lasting impact have been? And perhaps not profound, but it was profound enough that it made me want to go back and correct it. So there are a lot of other strategies that we could think about as we're working with kids. The one that just thinking through about taking care of ourselves, we can also work with students to help them learn to take care of themselves. Like, what do they need when they're feeling stressed, when they're feeling challenged, when something is uncomfortable for them? What foods make them feel comfortable? What drinks? What textures? What sounds? What words? Thinking through so that they can almost create a toolbox for themselves, so that when they're having a hard time, they have their go-tos of things that are actually really helpful for them. For example, water. Water is really important, and many of us know this. When a kid's having a hard time in class, we'll often ask them if they want to go get a drink of water. And we do that instinctually. But if we could teach our students to think about what it is that works for them, so they could proactively think to themselves, oh, I'm having a hard time. I might need to go get a drink of water. That's another way of thinking through how they take care of themselves. And then you could go one step further, and what are the foods you need? What textures do you like to have? What words and sounds, making sure they understand the differences between those, help you when you're having a hard time. And if you model you doing this yourself, then you are taking care of yourself when the topic is challenging for you, and you're modeling for them, which is, of course, one of the things that we always want to do. Just looking through my list here, and if you're in a classroom, one of the topics or strategies that I love to do, and this goes back to an activity. I think I got it from GLSEN many years ago, but just putting up on your board or in your classroom or on a poster the words, "This is a safe place to discuss ... and have kids fill in the words around it with the topics that they want to talk about. and the things that are on their minds. And any of them that look like they're topics that if they come up for in your classroom or your advisory or homeroom and they're uncomfortable for you, you know ahead of time that they might potentially come up. So that's an area for you to look for resources on, or to practice, or to think about. Another one that I love is to develop a script. And the script can be anything, with any kind of situation having to do with when a topic has come up that you find particularly difficult yourself. So, one of the scripts I've already demonstrated for you is that's really important, and I want to give it the time that it deserves. And so, I'm going to need to come back to you. But there could be other scripts like, that's a new conversation for me. And I want to make sure that I'm really getting some resources and thinking it through. And I'm going to go ask so and so, or I'm going to go look it up here, or I'm going to get some of my own information ahead of time so I feel a little better equipped for this conversation. That models that you don't have to know everything, that you seek out your resources when necessary, that you really care about having a conversation with them that is really validating. These are all great things to model for them. Another is to make sure that you're creating a follow-up plan. And so this can look a lot of different ways. I'll look at it from different perspectives. When I was a school counselor and kids would talk to me frequently in the privacy of my office, they'd tell me something pretty personal. And this was similar to when I was a principal and I'd deal with disciplinary situations. I would tell my students, when you see me in the hall, I am not going to approach you about this. I'm not going to ask you about it. I'm not going to bring it up to you. So please don't ever worry if you see me coming towards you that I'm going to have this conversation with you. You, however, may bring it up to me at any time. And that this is really important because they need to know that we reset the relationship, that after they've said something or after we've had a conversation that was uncomfortable or vulnerable, we reset. We're not going to approach them about it in that way. But they also need to know that if it's on their minds, if it's bubbling up for them, that it's really something that they really need to discuss right away, they can bring it up to us. And then if we have our previous script of that, we might need time to think about it. Now we're building on the conversation. So one more strategy that I'll give is, actually, I'll give two more. One is before that, or and before. So if you ask a student at the beginning what happened, and they go back, sometimes they'll go back 5 minutes in a situation. Sometimes they'll go back 3 years. I've had middle schoolers who said, oh, since kindergarten, that's been going on. And that doesn't mean you have to do a long group therapy or anything like that, nor should you. But it does mean that if you don't get at what's going on in the beginning, they will often repeat the situation over and over again. So if you just stop at the beginning, what happened, and then ask them how that links to now and how you can resolve at the beginning. Finding out what the first thing was that was happening is crucial because, as I said, if not, it will repeat itself over and over again in different ways. And then lastly, I'll talk about feeling identification. So, and you don't need a clinical degree to have this as one of your strategies, but it's really important. We often focus on whatever the feeling was that's at the top of the surface. And some of them aren't even top of the surface, top of the pile. Some of them aren't even a feeling. So if I ask my middle schooler, how was your day? Sometimes the response I get is fine. But fine's not a feeling. So instead, if you ask for, what are you feeling right now? And anything else? And anything else? So, for example, what are you feeling right now? I'm angry. And anything else? Frustrated. And anything else? Sad. And before that, left out. And if you keep going backward, you get to that vulnerable feeling of left out. The vulnerable feeling is the one that is often driving the behavior. And we often only respond to the one. We respond to what angry looks like. Remember, the first feeling was angry. But if we don't get at all of those different feelings and we're only attending to the one that is most visible, we miss the more vulnerable feeling. And the more vulnerable feeling is the one from which behavior comes. So when you're uncomfortable with a conversation with a student, you can look at this strategy in a couple of ways. One, look at all the feelings you're having. I'm feeling anxious. And anything else? Worried. And anything else? Nervous that I won't do it right. Anything else? Insecure. Okay, when I feel insecure, I need, going back to our previous strategy, I need to drink some water or drink some tea or whatever it is. You know what you need. So now you can attend to your own feeling. And if a student gets to those feelings and they're describing them, and we're not stopping with the more visible, socially acceptable feelings of angry or something like that, and we're getting at the more vulnerable feeling and attending to that, then even if we don't know how to manage it at the time, we have responses we can give them. We have strategies we can give them. We can even say, back to our original strategy, I don't know what it's like to feel that way right now. Or I don't know what it's like to be your age and feel that way. But I'm here and I care and I'm listening and I want to help. And that's really what it all comes down to. I work with thousands of kids a year and I ask them all the time, what is it you want from adults in your lives? And they tell me really simply, we want you to hear us. We don't want you to tell us. We want to be able to be quiet with you when we need to be quiet. We need to be able to have you really, really listen to us and not try to fix everything, but to help us fix everything or fix anything. So I thank you for joining me today. I hope you got some strategies that you can use. I look forward to hearing more from you. My website is www.jencourt, that's CORT.com, or you can follow me on any social media, Jen Court Educational Consulting. I hope you're well and that you're enjoying the conference. I'm really proud to be part of it.